What is a EHCP? So this stands for an Education, Health and Care Plan. And it's a legal document that stays with your child with additional needs up until the age of 25. This legal document outlines the special education, the health and social care needs of a child or a young person with additional needs. It also details the support and the provision required to help them achieve their goals and aspirations. So essentially it's a personalised plan that ensures children with additional needs receive the appropriate support to thrive in their education and beyond. Now there's 5 stages of the Education, Health and Care Plan. So the first one is the referral. So this is the initial step where the request for the EHC needs assessment is made. This is initiated by either parents, the schools or other professionals that are involved in your child's life. The second is the assessment. The local authority reviews this request and decides whether to proceed with that assessment. Okay? So if the assessment is approved, then information is gathered from various sources. That's from the child, if they're able to, the parents or carers, educators, health professionals, and just to understand that child's needs. The third is the actual plan development. Okay, so this is based on the assessment. From that, the local authority then develops a draft EHC plan. The fourth stage is the finalisation. So the draft plan is then shared with the parents or anyone that's involved in that child's life for review and feedback. So after sort of the input, the final EHC plan is issued. And then the fifth and final stage is the review. So this plan should be renewed annually. And it's just to assess the effectiveness and to make the necessary adjustments, just to ensure that the plan remains effective and relevant in supporting your child's changing needs. So I received my EHCP a year or so ago, and at that point I didn't know anything about it. I've heard parents speak about it, and that's as much as I knew. When my son first got offered a place in a nursery, which is not where he is currently, an EHCP was mentioned, and I was like, yeah, okay, do what you need to do. These are in the early days of me sort of identifying that my son had additional needs, and I just applied for him to go to the nearest nursery, literally 2 minutes around the corner. That experience, my naivety, I can say, of me thinking that that nursery would suit my son, I think harmed me from an emotional perspective more than it harmed my son. And I say that respectfully, because it got to a point where he was doing the settling in phase, and it worked out okay. He was doing maybe a couple of hours and then 3 hours, and then it got to a point where he wasn't coping in that environment, and we went down to 1 hour a day. And I remember being told by the leader at the time, the head teacher, if you'd like to call her that, that they would not be increasing my son's hours. He's only going to get 1 hour, and that was it. And I just think those words, even till today, just haunt me, actually, because at that point I felt that I failed my son. He was in a class with, it must have been 15 to 20, other children. And, if you have a neurotypical child, that's the setup, isn't it? There's nothing wrong with that. but actually that was not the right setting for him. It was just too much going on. He was overstimulating, and I'm sorry to say he was biting the nursery workers. There was an incident where he bit another child, and I was absolutely mortified. And I think he stayed there for about a month, and at that point I got on the phone to his health visitor, and she was the one who assessed my son when he was 2 years old, when he had the 2-year review, and I talk about that in my first video on the channel named My Story. And I said to her that, I don't think nurseries for my son, maybe he should just stay at home. I can give up my job and I can, homeschool him and teach him here. And she said to me, and again, this still resonates with me today, your son has every right, Karina, to have an education. Why would you want to keep him at home? That may not be the right establishment for him, but he has every right to be educated. And from that conversation, just someone just saying to me, no, stop it. This is about your child. This is about what he's entitled to. And she sent me a list of, I think there's a handful of what we call resourced nurseries in my local town. And I applied for him to go there, and there wasn't any spaces. So we waited, and I think a month later he got a space, and that's where he is now. And he's now looking to transition into reception at a special needs school. And my next video will talk about comparing mainstream to special school. And I talk about that because when he got into the nursery that he's in now, the nursery school, and I met the Senko worker, I just want to say that she was a godsend to my son. She took his needs seriously, as she did with every other child in his class. The class had no more than 6 or 7 children. It was manageable to my child. And as we got to know each other, and as she got to know my son, immediately she said, we're going to do an EHCP. I didn't know what that was. She obviously knew, and she got onto it straight away. And at that point, I had to educate myself in terms of what that meant, what I was supposed to do, what's included in it. And it just takes one person to say it's going to be okay for you to realise that it is going to be okay. They did absolutely everything. There is a section in there for parents to give their views on things, and I did that. I stumbled through that crying and laughing, just sort of recalling in my mind the good times, actually. It wasn't just a space for me just to talk about my son's needs, but also about how he's an absolute joy and a pleasure, for me to parent. And at that point, I felt that process of obtaining an EHCP was such a pleasure. I didn't have to fight the system. I hear from a lot of parents that they have to appeal, that, the local authority didn't grant them the plan, etc. And I just want to say, I'm sorry you've had to go through that. That's not my experience, and I've had a pleasurable experience in obtaining an EHCP. From the initial drafts, from the nursery inputting their thoughts on what my son needs, from me writing something in there, from the local authority, Senat team that was involved in my son's care. It was an absolutely fabulous experience. And I know that's not going to be the story for everyone, but I just want to be honest with you. What I would say to you, if you're in that position of obtaining a draft EHCP, is to read every section carefully. Now, this is a legal document, okay, and it's going to take time. And in some respects, yes, you know, we want things in place for our child, but please, I promise you, just it's worth your time just finding space, a quiet period where you can go through every single line. And that's not to criticize those that have done the assessment, is to ensure that your child receives what they are entitled to, what they need to thrive in life, okay? Contact your Senko if you have one at their school or their nursery, or any caseworker at the local authority for clarification. They may be busy, you know, but contact them, okay? Don't say no, don't give up, keep on at it. Now, what I learnt and what I heard from other parents is that just be mindful of vague language in the assessment, okay? So it might say things like your child should have access to, whereas really the language should be changed to your child will receive this, okay? And it's just making sure you know that your child is going to get it, and that it's not an option for the providers, the schools and the nurseries, or it's not dependent on whether they've got the funds, etc. They will get it, it's a legal document, and that's what they're entitled to, okay? I would also say for parents, just try and be proactive and organised when it comes to the plan, okay? Just remember that your child has rights. They have rights now and they'll have rights later, and they are enforceable, okay? If your school or nursery, educational establishment has not said that your child needs an EHCP, parents and carers, please know that you can request a needs assessment, okay? You know your child better than anyone. Trust yourself, give yourself grace, okay? If your child is in an establishment that is not suited to them, request an assessment. Go to your local authority, do some research, speak to people and request it, okay? I can't reiterate enough how important it is that your child has rights. Now, if you'd like to discuss this or any other matters, love you to book a call in with me and we can discuss whether, you know, you'll be able to access my Empowered Parent Pathway program. And we can have a discussion and see whether we can work together. The link is in the description below.